a big schedule ahead of us today, so welcome to all elected members and staff to today's meeting. I am going to ask His Worship to open our hui for us, and then I'll move through the agenda as quickly as I possibly can for you all. Just to note, there is a late item that's been presented by Councillor Crackett. If you haven't already updated your board books, could you please do so now? While His Worship opens our meeting, that will give you a chance to see that new update that's been put on board books. And just a reminder that today's meeting will be recorded, and the public excluded session will be removed from the recording, and it will be posted live onto, not live as in now, but posted afterwards for the public to get a link. So with that in mind, I'll hand it over to His Worship, our Mayor, to open our meeting.
Thank you. And it's certainly an amazing time that we're going through. If you're a history buff, it's sort of got an edge of excitement to it, as well as all the other responsibilities that we have. I've focused this week on buying local. Now, a lot of people have had over the years buy New Zealand or buy local campaigns, and I've always been a bit reluctant, because if you're saying buy local, it starts becoming a bit exclusive, and it can lead to repercussions. Oh, so you don't want our stuff, or we don't want you, kind of attitude could spring up. So we've got to be careful about it, but I think it might work because it's such an unusual situation that we find ourselves in, and I hope there won't be any repercussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Appreciate that, and look forward to more buying local. I'm sure our businesses out there will be too. So I'm just going to move into apologies. I see Councillor Lewis has joined us. So I'm not sure that there are any apologies from today, unless someone has one. If you just want to unmute yourself and let us know, that would be great. Great, so no apologies. The interest register, obviously item number 4 is self-explanatory. If there's any updates, to send to Langi for that. And then we move into administrative matters, which is item number 5, and I'll hand it over to Claire to talk us through that report. Claire.
Thanks, Councillor Biddle. First off, can I apologise to councillors that we are certainly learning how to build an agenda when everybody is remote, and so there have been a couple of hiccups. The first is that you should already be aware that we picked up the wrong statement of intent from the Southland Museum and Art Gallery, and that's been corrected. The second is that in this report there was actually an additional recommendation which has got dropped off. It's referred to in Appendix 2, but it was in relation to the way in which Council conducts its business and the frequency of these meetings. So, turning to the report, the first recommendation is that you receive the report. The second is that you receive the minutes of the Infrastructure Committee meeting of 23 March. I've laboured the point a little bit, but it's deliberate on my part. In 50 years from now, when we are seeking to look back, we look to Council for the acceptance and the receipt of minutes. So I don't believe that committee minutes should actually be presented to this committee. It is a committee of Council, but it is not the Council. There is nothing to stop you receiving those committee minutes, which is why this particular one is here today, but that's an explanation as to why not all committee minutes are here today. I've pulled the Infrastructure Committee minutes out specifically because there are some actions in there that were recommendations to Council that the staff would like to proceed with during this lockdown period. And you'll see them in front of you, that you adopt the amended Elizabeth Park Management Plan, that you amend it to allow the development of a BMX facility, which will be at the BMX Club's cost. The third recommendation on that report is that you appoint an elected member to replace Councillor Clark, who has resigned from WasteNet, and I think that's self-explanatory. And in Appendix 2 of tab 5, you will see a calendar that proposes that for the month of May, you have weekly Committee of Council meetings at 3 o'clock. That is on the basis that A, we remain in alert level 3 or higher, and B, that it is easier to schedule meetings and cancel them than to not schedule them and require them to come in at late notice. And as that note says, we've advertised or previously advertised scheduled meetings as cancelled, and we would now get on and just advertise that they will be weekly Committee of Council meetings to deal with all business. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Claire. Sorry, Your Worship.
Just Claire, I was, someone approached me, one of the councillors, and said, do you mind weekly meetings? And I didn't have any objection to it, but it wasn't something I was advocating. So if any councillors feel that, I don't know, maybe fortnightly would suffice, let them speak out and say so now.
Thank you, Your Worship. What I'd like to do, if I can, is just move that we receive the administrative matters first. So I'll move that we receive the report first. Sorry.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Councillor Soper.
I'll move the second recommendation as well.
Great. I'm actually going to hand that recommendation to Councillor Pottinger as the Chair of Infrastructure. I think it's important that he leads that off, and then when we get to Appendix 2, Your Worship, I'll lead out with your suggestion around the meeting times and dates. So all those in favour that we receive the report, please raise your right hand. All those against? Great, carried. So I'll move to Councillor Pottinger in regards to his committee infrastructure to receive and confirm those minutes and then move those recommendations.
Yes, I would like to move those recommendations from the last held infrastructure meeting as listed on board books.
I'll second that. Seconded.
Muted, Tony.
Would you like me to put that motion, Councillor Pottinger, or are you happy to do that?
Yeah, well, no, you need to put it as chair. Yeah.
Thank you. So I'll put that motion forward. All those in favour, raise your right hand or pen. Give us a wave. Against? All those against? Great. That motion's moved. Thank you. And then we'll move to His Worship's suggestion in relation to Appendix 2 in regards to the meeting times. And I see Councillor Clark had a question in regards to that.
Yeah, Tony, my view is that fortnightly would be fine by my position. We have weekly meetings on a Thursday now where we catch up with Claire and the senior staff. So I don't know why we need actually to have two meetings, given that it's not technically a full council meeting, and we can't, as Claire suggested, put anything to this meeting from the committees anyway.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Claire, I see you want to respond to that. No, Claire's frozen, so I'm not sure what's happened there. Councillor Munston and Councillor Pottinger have their hands up.
I'm just wondering whether weekly meetings is to help move things along, because the longer time we have between meetings, the longer time we can the staff have to wait before they can action things. So is it so that things can move along that we're having weekly ones?
I'm assuming that Claire can answer that question, but I'm not sure if she's with us or she's still frozen over there.
No, I'm with you.
Thank
The sun is springing on my back, so any freezing has been taken out. There's a couple of things. The first is that we do have a period of time to make up for that. I think it would be useful to keep that momentum going now that we are back into the swing of something. I just want to make sure that councillors understand that this committee of council has all delegated authorities of council other than the 6 matters explicitly referred to in the Local Government Act, and it does replace the other committees meeting in relation to any question about catch-ups. They are not formal, and so to use the wording that you, Madam Chair, bring at times, if you want to bring something to the table, it needs to be in a formal meeting because a catch-up cannot make decisions. Hence the suggestion of weekly. I know that already there are at least 3 items for the agenda next week. I recognise that keeping weekly may be demanding and it may be possible to cancel, but I was just suggesting it's easier to schedule and then cancel than the other way round.
Thank you, Claire. I see Councillor Pottinger had a question, then I'll move to Councillor Soper.
Thanks, Tony. Look, it was along the lines when Claire introduced this topic that it's easier to have the meetings scheduled and then maybe not have them if not needed. But I mean, there shouldn't be any excuse for busyness of any elected member at this time, not to be able to attend anything. So I would sooner have them locked and loaded along with catch-ups, and if need be, one gets dropped if that's the case. But you know, you've got to have them in the schedule according to our all our laws written down for meetings. So I'm totally good with it every week.
Thank you, Councillor Pottinger. Anyone else has a question or a comment? Sorry, Councillor Soper, my apologies.
Yeah, I'm very happy with the weekly meetings, especially as I had assumed that meant they would be formal and our Thursday ones are only catch-ups and therefore informal. So I'm very happy that we have them in as weekly. I think it's far too important at this time that we keep that momentum going. And if we do indeed find that it's more than we need, they are easier to cancel than they are to set in an ad hoc manner. So I'm very happy to set them weekly.
Thank you, Councillor Soper. Anyone else to add to that? If not, I am happy to put a recommendation to the table that we propose or adopt the proposed meeting calendar schedule for the Committee of Council for April and May. If anyone is happy to move that recommendation or second that recommendation, sorry, I'll move it. Thanks, Councillor Soper. Councillor Kett has a question.
No, I just second it.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Kett. Thank you. So moved by Councillor Soper, seconded by Councillor Kett. Is that okay? Great. Any further discussion or questions around that? Great. All those in favour, please raise your right hand. All those against? Great. Motion carried. Thank you, team. So then we'll move to, if we can, the appointment of a city councillor or elected member to replace Councillor Clark. Is there anyone out there who is interested in this particular position? And if so, could you indicate by raising your hand and talking to that? Okay, all right. Okay, I'm not sure what we do in this. Is there anyone that you would like to nominate for this this role?
So long as they're not here.
Understand people's apprehension.
Councillor Cricket, as the chair, I think it's important that you clarify for us what the role consists of, considering our history with WasteNet and the fact that we will in short time resolve those issues. So it might be appropriate that you give us a wee description of the committee and the responsibility, and that may change some people's minds. Councillor Cricket.
Thank you. Going forward, obviously, with the completion of the current recyclables processing contract that we have, the relationship that we still have with our partners at WasteNet and our other responsibilities with the landfill and transfer station and such is actually like really positive. So although it might seem like a daunting task, it isn't as such, and we're all getting on really well with the remaining activities that we are continuing with.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. I see there is a hand up from Councillor Ludlow, so I'll go Councillor Ludlow and then Councillor Soper.
Question for Councillor Crackett. Times of meetings, please. Sorry.
They have been at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and we've also had some in the morning, but it's not at the moment. It's not really. It's movable should it need to be, I guess. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Cricket. Councillor Soper.
Thank you. I was going to say I would be interested, but have an obvious reason why I would have to declare conflicts of interest on a number of occasions at the moment. And I was going to ask Councillor Ludlow if Councillor Ludlow was interested in being nominated.
Sorry, have I switched my microphone on? Yes, I have. There we go. Yeah, provided we were able to meet mornings, I could accommodate that.
In that case, I'm happy to nominate Councillor Ludlow.
Typically, when we are back at our usual chambers, our meetings have been in the mornings, so provided we give everybody else a heads up, I'm sure that won't be an issue. Thank you for putting your name forward.
Councillor Ludlow, thank you. I see Mr. Kett. Councillor Kett has a question, so.
No, I was just going to second his nomination, that was all. Did you receive that?
Beautiful, I did. Sorry, I was just trying to unmute myself there. So we've had a recommendation to nominate Councillor Ludlow, moved by Councillor Soper, seconded by Councillor Kett. All those in favour of Councillor Ludlow taking the appointment of, I guess, council elected representative on WasteNet in place of Councillor Clark, please raise your right hand. All those against? Great, carried. Thank you, team. That's wonderful. Okay, so we've moved to item number 6 on the agenda, which is the principles of the infrastructure strategy. Again, I'm going to hand this to Councillor Pottinger. But before I hand that to Councillor Pottinger, Jeremy Rees, welcome to our meeting. Jeremy is the Engineering Services Manager and he will speak to the report for us. Kia ora, Jeremy, wherever you are, down there somewhere.
Right, I think Jane was going to kick that off, so I'll let Jane kick it off.
My apologies, Jane.
Thank you.
That's all right. Thank you, Councillor Biddle. Now, Jeremy did all the work and wrote the report, but he's part of my team. So I'd just like to make a few introductory comments and then hand over to Jeremy and councillors for questions. So just some high-level comments. The infrastructure strategy is a statutory requirement and it works together with the financial strategy to underpin the LTP and covers about 30 years. You may well know all this, but just as a little reminder. You'll see set out in the report the principles and strategies which are appropriate to guide your plan and the associated asset management plans. And probably of most note is we're planning to build on the existing infrastructure strategy and asset management plans and simply update them, and we'll bring them back to you at a workshop in June. So other than that, that's all I wanted to say to set the scene. I think please direct all the difficult questions to Jeremy. And Jeremy, I think I've covered most of what we wanted to highlight. Is that right?
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I guess, yeah, any questions on that? I won't try to labour through too much of it for you.
Any questions? Councillor Pottinger and then Councillor Clark.
Thanks. I note that it states that, and this is good, that we don't intend to expand our infrastructure at our own cost. And this is obviously referring to subdivisions and stuff like that. Now, previously, has this been the, I think we have infrastructure saying this, and yet our regulatory department and previously what I have observed have gone ahead and allowed subdivisions, but at our cost. Now, I'm not sure, do both departments sort of align themselves, or how does that work?
Thank you for that. A lot of that comes down to we're not trying to extend the network to service new areas. Yeah. And as part of my role, I'm also undertaking the development engineer role to some degree and trying to integrate what we're doing better with planning. And that really comes down to at the time of consent that we make sure that the applications are not costing council, that the applicant is got appropriate conditions in as part of their consent to cover that infrastructure. Sorry.
No, that's good. And just that, obviously, and one of the recent examples that has crept up on us is the people wanting their roads sealed because of too much traffic. And now the only reason there's too much traffic is because of massive subdivision on someone's lifestyle block or farm. There used to be 3 people down a road, and now there's 23 people. And the pressure comes on council to have that road paved or tar sealed or something. So if all this gets, if these rules are put in place and are all coherent through all departments, it'd be really, really good.
Thank you, Councillor Pottinger. I'm assuming, if you just want to give me a wave, that your question's been answered. Excellent, thank you. And Councillor Clark had a question, thank you.
Yeah, Jeremy, bear with my lack of knowledge on this, but I noticed in some of the infrastructure work that's done by some other councils that they have a sort of a local rating system built into their strategy, which basically in lay terms says that if you're tendering out work or for a project, that there is a differential. I think Gore's got a 10% differential for local firms. So what it does is it sort of sustains local businesses ahead of maybe the multinationals or the larger companies that might come in from out of district. I wonder whether that sits in our strategy or whether it's something that we have in some other policy around procurement.
I'll take to Jeremy, but if I could just interject that's the procurement policy where that would sit.
Yeah, and it is there.
Okay, thanks for that.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there any further questions on this particular report of either Jane or Jeremy? Great. Is there anyone who would be happy to move those recommendations that the report Principles of Infrastructure Strategy be received?
Yeah, I will move that.
Thank you, Councillor Pottinger. And thank you, Councillor Lewis, who seconded that report. Any further discussion or questions on that? Great. All those in favour, if you just give me a wee wave here. Against? Carried. Thanks, team. Moving to item number 7 of our agenda, which is the suspension of solid waste bylaw, which we're all aware has been done. I'll hand it to Claire for a quick conversation around this report.
Thank you, Councillor Biddle. I'm happy to take the report as read. Answer any questions.
I'm happy to move it because it speaks for itself and it has already happened, so it's only a confirmation.
Seconded.
Thank you very much. So that report and the recommendations being moved by Councillor Soper, seconded by Councillor Abbott. Any questions and discussion around that? All those in favour, raise your right pencil. Against? Carried. Thank you. and then we move into our statement of intent. So I've got the first one, which is item number 8, Invercargill City Holdings Limited statement of intent, and I'll ask Dave Foster to speak to that report. Kia ora, David.
Kia ora. Look, it's a fairly short report. Obviously, the statement of intent is attached. Look, it's a good statement of intent, quite significantly improved on prior years, although last year was a big step forward too. It covers very well all of the operations that are going on in the subsidiaries. Main point, I guess, in terms of it is the dividend distribution. It's stated at 4.8, which is actually the amount we've already budgeted. One of the things that is good is that it reflects a level of dividend that is rising with our expected inflation rate. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Dave. Questions? I've got Councillor Lewis, Councillor Soper.
I have no questions, Tony. I was just going to move it because I thought it was pretty self-explanatory. Thank you.
I have no questions either, and I was going to second it because I also think it's self-explanatory, and as Dave has said, an improvement on some past ones.
Thank you, Councillor Soper. So I have a recommendation on the table, which you will have all read under the report, moved by Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Soper. I see a question from Councillor Pottinger.
Okay, it states in the SOI that at least every 12 months there is a meeting between the shareholder and Holdco. So when do we have that the other day with the briefing by Brian Wood, or was that quite informal, was it? Or are we, Dave, are we going to have a sort of formal meeting with Holdco to, talk about things and ask questions?
I think you want to have and we're trying to get into place a mix of formal versus informal. The one that the SOI is referring to will be the AGM. So that's the one effectively where they host. They're the ones who drive the agenda of that meeting. There are also meetings in play that we drive the agenda of, where we get them along to the council meeting to effectively give an update to the councillors.
Right, who triggers that, or what's the process for that one, Dave?
We trigger that, and it's I'm trying to think whether it's half yearly or quarterly. Certainly it will be at least half yearly, and I think we were getting into the program of having them come along on a quarterly basis to give us an update quarterly, because we do our reporting on a quarterly basis.
Right, so that's a two-way sort of dialogue meeting rather than the AGM.
Yes, yep. The AGM is theirs. They drive that agenda. It's on their turf, so to speak. Where they get in control of that meeting, as opposed to the other ones where we're in control of the meeting and the agenda.
So just, would you know off the top of your head when the next one may be? Would it a few months away, or?
No, I don't. We'll look to schedule it once we're back and out of the COVID. Yep.
Cool. That's good. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Pottinger. Councillor Abbott, or have I missed someone?
Rangi, I'm pretty sure that last term under the previous administration, it was actually said that we would meet 3 monthly on an informal basis, just as knowledge to the council.
Yeah, no, I think that could be right. In the old days, they used to ask when I wasn't available, and then have the meetings.
Thank you, Councillor Pottinger. I'll move to Councillor Soper. Sorry, you're on mute.
I was just going to concur that my memory was that we had decided it would be quarterly, but that the COVID-19 crisis had upset that, and I would think it would be reasonably straightforward to get it back on track when we're in the position to do that. But my memory was certainly that we'd said it would be good to do quarterly.
That's right.
Thank you very much. So I take that lead that we are looking for a meeting to happen, Mr. Foster, when we can come out of lockdown and have the ability to do so. from what I'm feeling from the table. And I think we've got a Councillor Clark with a question. Is that right, Councillor Clark? Did you? Yep, thank you.
Yeah, Dave, I don't have any issues with all of the report. Just one minor one. In the listings you've got there on page 27, above where it's got performance targets, you've got a heading that's Invercargill City Property Limited. And it talks there about HWCP Management Limited hold the balance of land acquired, and ICPL continues to work with Holdco and with the City Council. And I'm just wondering what the benefit is of actually keeping the property company in place. Do we actually need it for the benefit of managing that land balance that we've got, or is it something that somewhere down the track might be away from the structure?
I think it's probably worth having that discussion once ICL is properly formed and the transfer has occurred. And at that point, there'll still only be HWCP. And I think at that point, when we know what that is, it'll be worth turning our minds to whether that land actually gets transferred to something else. I think a good thing about it is at the moment, it sort of keeps it separate, it keeps it clear, and keeps it probably sort of boxed up into a section, but it's worth our while once the rest of the land is done to determine whether that ICPL HWCP structure and its ownership is going to be worthwhile keeping in place into the future.
Yeah, thank you.
You need to take your mute off, Tony.
Sorry, my apologies. Any further discussion on that report? So the recommendations are that we receive the report and that Council provides no specific comment for changes to the statement of intent. Have I got a mover for that? Thank you, Councillor Lewis, and seconded Councillor Clark. All those in favour, wave your right hand. All those against? Motion carried. Thank you. Langi, I'm just going to check that you can hear all of this loud and clear. Probably a bit too late now, but I'm assuming, Langi, you can hear all of that.
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have item number 9, which is the Invercargill City Charitable Trust Statement of Intent. Dave, this is yours again.
Yes, and I'll be even shorter on this one than I was on the last one. Look, this is it's a fairly short statement of intent, significantly improved on last year. Last year's was a little bit of a jumble. They put quite a lot of work into this. It's much clearer. The main issue in this one is an issue that Council has considered in its own right, which is actually the ownership of Rugby Park and whether Rugby Park should continue to be an ICCT asset. That's really a thing for the Council to determine over the next year or so. And you'll be aware that we've commissioned some tax advice in terms of that, because it could trigger quite a significant taxation cost in doing the transfer back to us, and we need to know that before we do the paper up to the Council in terms of the recommendation. So I've got no further. I don't think there's any comments we should be making back.
Thank you.
That one.
Thank you, Councillor Soper. Any questions around that? I do have a question, Dave, and I think that it's probably fair that I disclose that I had spoken to our CE about this earlier. So under governance on page 40 of the statement of intent, it says that there are, to ensure that trust ensures all of its trustees and executive officers against liabilities to other parties that may rise from their positions. Now, on this particular board, we have councillors and our chief executive as a trustee. My concern was that because our chief executive runs the administrative part of this committee, that in fact she should be replaced, or chief executive, whoever holds that position, should actually be replaced by someone in governance. I don't believe that our chief executive has an issue with that, and I'm wondering if we could have that changed within the SOI before it's adopted, if possible. And I'm just opening any discussion for that, as I'm not sure if that can be done.
I think if I can, it's not an insurance issue. It's a very good question and worth our while turning my eyes to. It's not, though, a statement of intent issue, because I would imagine that would be something that's established under the foundation document for the trust. Usually a trust like this determines who the members will be. So you would actually need to go back to the settlement deed of the trust. And that can be quite a complicated legal process to go and get a settlement of a trust amended. But we can look into it.
Thank you very much. I'd appreciate that. Councillor Soper.
I was just going to say on that, I think you'll find the appointments were confirmed in the mayoral list of appointments at the beginning of the term. So again, you might have to do a wee bit more research on that. It's not a statement of intent issue because the appointments aren't in the statement of intent as such.
Thank you, Councillor Soper, and thank you, Dave. I brought that to your attention anyway, so that's a good start. I think Councillor Clark had raised it earlier on, and we just wanted to ensure that we could move that discussion forward a bit more. So thank you for that. I'm hearing, and I don't know why, crickets, or someone's got something in their background. So I'm just going to ask everybody to ensure that if they're not speaking, they're mute. It may be my ears or my speakers.
I think it's mine.
Is that okay? Thank you, Mr. Foster. It sounds interesting. Okay, so back to business. There's a report here and recommendations to be adopted. Do I have a mover for those?
I'll move.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. And I see Councillor Clark has raised his hand to second those. Any further discussion or questions on those? Thanks. Please raise your right hand. All in favour? Against? Councillor Ludlow, did you raise your hand? All carried.
Only to second the motion, that's all right.
Thank you, team. All done. So that's all passed. Now we move to the Southern Museum and Art Gallery Trust Statement of Intent, and because I chair the SMAG Trust Board, I'm going to ask that any questions be directed to the Deputy, because I'm chairing this meeting today. So Darren will lead us off after Dave Foster has spoken to this report. Thank you, Dave.
Here come the crickets back. No, it stopped. Look, again, fairly straightforward. It meets the requirements that you'd expect from a statement of intent. I guess again, look.
Cricket gone.
Crickets are gone and Dave has frozen.
Oh no, he's back.
Okay, which is effectively the ongoing governance is the major issue. We know that well. So in the mix of it, I don't think there's really much for us to feed back to SMAG in regards to their statement of intent, unless councillors had some particular issues.
Thank you, Dave. So I'll just open the floor for questions and I'll allow Darren to take that.
No one has questions?
Councillor Pottinger, Councillor Soper and Councillor Clark.
Thanks. My question is regarding a statement that occurs under paragraph 1.5, financial assumptions. It states that SMAG own the building. I thought we had that sort of clarified, that SMAG don't own the building, ICC does.
I guess clarify that that's not untrue. The trust board is still just waiting to formally satisfy itself.
Okay, so can we receive it in this format? Because if we or adopt it, or what are we doing with it? We just
Yes, because it's easy enough to amend a statement of intent. I mean, for the ones that we've produced in recent years, because we've had the renovation project sitting in the background, there's been a lot of assumptions that are just around business as usual. This is quite adequate, bearing in mind that everything's in a state of flux over ownership of the building, governance structure, and the redevelopment project. So it suits our needs at this point. And by our needs, I mean councils. So
is there some dispute? Do I take it there is some dispute over whether council does own it? Or has that been accepted?
I wouldn't call it a dispute. The trustees just queried it and asked for some reassurance around it. So we haven't had a chance to meet since that question was last asked. Dave?
In the mix of it, what we found as we've been looking through, the SMAG financial statements actually have the building within their financial statements. And I had a conversation with one of my staff about that. That's an issue that needs to be worked through. That doesn't necessarily denote ownership, but what it does denote is what accounting works on for those issues is a thing called control. And so because the trust, to all intents and purposes, has controlled the building in terms of access, maintenance, who's doing what's happening in it, it has been accounted for as their asset. It doesn't denote ownership or non-ownership. And of course, the issue of ownership has only come up from memory within the last 6 months. As to, I think up until now, everybody believed that SMAG was the building owner, which, as I say, could be confused with control versus ownership. But it's possibly worth just noting in terms of getting back to them in regards to that question.
Right.
Sorry, Councillor Ludlow. I was just checking. Sorry to confuse everybody. I had Councillor Soper wanting to ask a question. Was there anybody else? Thank you. And then Councillor Clark. Sorry, Darren.
So sorry, Tony. All I was going to say is that we'll feed that reflection back, and the trust board can amend the statement of intent.
Thank you, Darren. Councillor Soper.
Mine wasn't a question. I raised my hand when there didn't seem to be any other questions to move. So if Councillor Clark's got a question, I'll leave moving until that question's been asked and answered.
Thank you, Councillor Soper. Councillor Clark.
Yeah, Darren, just a couple of quick issues. Rangi's already covered the issue of ownership, which I wasn't comfortable with because I think it denotes position that we would not be happy with. But on two other quick issues, just as a bit of an update for me, is where do you see the future of the museum going? So do you see the museum as being an Invercargill City museum and the collection, I guess, for want of a better word, being more of a south and wide thing that would be covered by SNAG?
So happy to answer that. I guess what's being set up and proposed by Invercargill City is that it would be a council asset, but yes, that the collection is a regional one, and there's already the regional committee established, and it can become the guardian of the collection. So short answer to your question is yes.
Thank you.
Councillor,
happy to move the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Soper. I appreciate you doing that on my behalf, Councillor Ludlow, and would be happy to just remind everyone that Council has adopted that recommendation for the governance to go to consultation. And I just have a question around when that would likely to happen, of either Claire or Dave, now with COVID.
Madam Chair, the original intent was that the consultation would take place as part of the annual plan. You received that advice at the same time as you received advice that it wasn't legally necessary. We will look at that position and come back to Council.
Thank you, Claire. Would appreciate that. Councillor Clark.
Yeah, just a second issue for you, Darren. If City's taking over the long-term ownership, so it's Invercargill City Museum that we're heading towards, and SMAG has ownership of the collection, which I hear what you're saying on that. Does that mean that we'll get some SMAG buy-in and some buy-in from the other two councils when it comes to the storage facility?
SMAG already support the storage facility, and I guess we stand alone alongside Invercargill City in advocating for it to the other councils.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. So that motion, the draft statement of intent for Southern Museum Art Gallery be received by Council, that Council provides no specific comment for changes that may need to be amended in regards to the ownership of the building, which Councillor Ludlow has said that he would take back to our committee, and we will wait. We have requested that information from Claire, and we will do so in writing from a SMAG perspective to the Chief Executive to get that ownership issue finalised. So with that in mind, the motion's been moved, recommendations have been moved and seconded. All those in favour, raise your right hand. All those against? Carried. Excellent, thank you. So moving now to the Great South Statement of Intent, and I'll pass you to Rhiannon. Kia ora, Rhiannon. Nice to see you.
Kia ora. Thank you, Chair. Kia ora, councillors. So yeah, I will take the report as read, noting the effect that COVID-19 has had on the operation of Great South and their need to refocus their statement of intent. The report includes the amended process. I will just move to the section funding breakdown, where I've put a proposal for your discussion and consideration in terms of the indication that Council wishes to make to Great South as to where they would like their focus to be. So I have proposed a new funding breakdown, which you can see within the table. Proposing a reduction of 50,000 from the 2019-2020 period in the area of regional economic development, an increase in 100,000 in the area of business development, which includes the business support work, which Great South have indicated as a big priority at the moment in their response to COVID-19. I'm proposing a 50,000 reduction in the tourism development budget, an increase in 50,000 in the events delivery budget, and a reduction in the regional wellbeing to the 50,000 to allow for that support for housing as discussed at the earlier meeting in January. So just to summarise those recommendations, it's to enable Great South the flexibility to respond to the COVID-19 situation, to help with the restart process and working with businesses to overcome this unique challenge. So it reflects that importance of increased business support and the support that Council wants to make sure is available to those people that may be affected by unemployment. And it also recommends a focus on the city centre and on events to enable that restart for domestic tourism. You'll see I am still recommending a small reduction in the tourism budget. This is to reflect the fact that that cannot continue or restart until level 1, and it's likely that that may take considerable period of time. And it's important to be aware that those areas of the country that have previously been largely focused on international tourism will be refocusing on domestic. And so hence the recommendation that Invercargill really focus on getting the city centre restart focused around events.
Thank you, Rhiannon. Councillors, I know that we had an excellent workshop around this and there was a lot of discussion, so I welcome that discussion to the table and encourage you to speak to this particular topic. Obviously, COVID and the impact on our community is going to be huge. Great South will be predominant, very critical in that recovery, so where we put our money and suggest that they focus on during this recovery time is going to be critical. Councillors, I've got Councillor Clark. Anyone else wanting to ask any questions about this? Okay, Councillor Clark, and then I've just got one as well. Thank you, Rhiannon.
Yeah, Rhiannon, don't disagree with everything you put up. I think it's an excellent reshaping of the money. An interesting comment from Tourism New Zealand Chief Executive in the last 24 hours. He said nationally the tourism industry is $40 billion, but of that 40 billion, only 17 billion is actually overseas. That 23 is actually internal. So what you were saying there before about needing to pick up on encouraging internal people to come south, and part of that will be the maybe the events that we can get into the city and certainly into the stadium is a good look for me. The external stuff will be delivered by factors way outside our pay grade with borders. So I thought that was a good reflection from tourism, that more than half our tourism dollars actually are from internal movements.
Thank you. Go for it, Rhiannon, sorry.
Just to agree, that's absolutely correct. I think that what is important to be just to be aware of in that restart of the domestic tourism is that the indications we've had from economists is that market is not likely to bounce up to exactly the same level it was before, and there will be increased competition for those domestic tourists because of the markets that have been largely international in focus before. Obviously we have Queenstown on our doorstep, will be competing for those same tourists. So that's just that response.
Yeah, just to add to that, Rhiannon, the other thing that the Tourism New Zealand Chief Executive said was the fact that we don't sometimes catch is that we, as New Zealanders, spend about $9 billion a year travelling overseas. And while people might be a little bit careful with their discretionary money, that might be a pot of gold that people will start to turn inwards as opposed to outwards. So I thought that was an interesting reflection as well.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Soper and then Councillor Kett.
Thank you. It's not so much a question as just the comment that I think it's a very practical refocus of our contract funding monies. And I think the fact that we have noted the need for Great South to maintain flexibility in its budgeting due to the unknown factors that are obviously going to be with us for quite some time is an important part of that refocus, and the fact that we've also noted that we would want to be informed of any budget changes required ahead of those changes being made. So I think it's a good practical refocus, but also providing for the flexibility that Great South is going to need. So I'm quite comfortable with where things are there at the moment. And I also note the core funding is being maintained, which gives Great South a great deal of security in that core funding.
Thank you, Councillor Kett.
Yeah, just Nobby, what were those figures? There was a bit of noise here and I didn't pick up. How much the tourists been going overseas and internally?
Okay, three bits of information. Our tourism industry, which is what comes in and moves around the country, is 40 billion. 17 billion is external people coming into our country, and the other 23 is Kiwis moving around our country. And the last factor was, as New Zealanders, we spend 9 billion a year going overseas. Now, some of that will be tourism and some of that will be, I guess, people going for commercial reasons, but that's a big chunk that's no longer going. So that some of that might be redirected back into internal.
Yeah, and taking that on board, I hear a lot of other areas in New Zealand are gearing up to attack the citizens of New Zealand to travel to their area. I heard them talking about it on News Talk ZB the other night. Do you feel that amount of money that we've put aside to attract people here is enough.
Well,
Councillor Clark?
the other thing that came out in the article was another thing that I thought was interesting, and it was more of a peripheral one. And what they said was, once we get out of lockdown, the country's out of lockdown, our borders are open, a lot of conferences that might have been held in places overseas may very well be held here, because people will see this as a very safe place to come to. So, yeah, I don't think what's in the Great South budget is necessarily going to generate the tourism coming here, but it's just an overarching, I guess, mechanism allows us to focus on what we can do to encourage it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Does that answer your question, Councillor Kett?
Yeah, almost. Thank you.
Do you want to try again?
No, I'm happy. I reckon the more we spend, the more money we will attract to our region. It's all about retail, and I've been in retail most of my working life, and it does work. If you do it correctly, we'll benefit by it. If we benefit, Short Island will benefit, Fiordland will benefit. We've got to work together and work very hard.
Agreed. Thank you, Councillor Kett. My question was already asked, so that's okay. Thank you, Councillor Clark, for doing that. So we'll move now to the recommendations, or back to the recommendations, knowing that that budget breakdown is what we are looking at and the direction that we're giving Great South to move forward. The only other question I had, sorry, Rhiannon, was around the events. $100,000, it's not a lot of money, and I can't see a lot of events sort of happening in the next few months anyway. Is that going to be sufficient for that financial year?
So the recommendation is to increase the funding by 50,000 to reflect that conversation that Council's been having around the importance of events. It is, of course, not a huge amount of money when you take it into account, but in terms of proportion, I think it's the amount I would recommend at this point.
Perfect, thank you. So anyone happy to move those recommendations on this report?
I'll move them.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Lewis had his hand up there, sorry, and seconded by Councillor Soper.
Yep.
All those, any further discussion and questions? Cool. All those in favour, raise your right hand. I know you're getting sick of raising your hands, but I've got to see them. Thank you. Against? Great, carried. Now, Your Worship, you've been pretty quiet, so I'm just going to check in with you to see if you wanted to add anything in here before we move to the next part of the meeting.
Well, there's a few bits and pieces. One was a typo, and I hate raising issues over typos, but we had Councillor Sycamore with us for a long time, and as a printer, he always pulled us up on at least half a dozen typos, and mine was the word meeting should be replaced if the word member, and that's on my one on page, get my glasses out, page 3. And just I'm not sure what happened there, but on the Committee of Council, it said we would consist of a quorum of 7 and 2 members must be physically present. And then it was said, however, this was replaced by COVID-19 Response Legislation Act 2020, which provides for a member of a local authority has the right to attend any meetings by means of an audio or audio-visual link. And I wondered what change had occurred between those two positions, and does that mean anyone can plug into us and listen to our whole discussion, or is it just another, there's a word missing somewhere?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm wondering if I could get some clarification from Claire around that. Is that possible, please, Claire?
Sure. Thanks, Councillor Biddle. I think His Worship is referring to the fact that at Council's last meeting, and I believe that date was the 24th of March,
Yep.
Unaware of whether the government would change the legislation, Council took the only step it could to keep operating, and that was that it established a new committee, the Committee of Council. It delegated all authorities of Council bar the 6 in the Act, and established the Deputy Mayor as the chair of that Committee of Council. And it worked on the basis that the law as it stood on the 24th of March said that any Committee of Council can have a quorum as small as 2 members. And so what we, the Invercargill City Council, did was said, we will establish a committee where everyone is a member and 2 members will need to be in the building, so to speak, because that was the only option available to us at the time that Council met on the 24th of March. After that meeting, and I think it was about the 26th of March, the government introduced some emergency legislation into the House and overrode what I'll call the usual provisions in the Act, and said that all meetings could be by video conference. Those provisions only last for the terms of the pandemic, and the government also said, whilst we like your public meetings to be available to all members of the public, we understand that Zoom makes that harder, and so we will allow you to have your meeting and then upload it to your website afterwards so that public scrutiny is possible. So the report that you are referring to, Your Worship, is acknowledging how we started on the 24th of March and what changed during that small period, and the fact that we are now giving effect to the Committee of Council that Council established, but we are not requiring any elected members to go into the building because the government has asked that wherever possible you don't.
Okay.
Thank
And
you.
just a little quirky issue of mine. It's sort of slightly personal for 3 of us, I think, on the council. If you're over 70, particular attention is being drawn to your vulnerability. And it's just a really good article. I'll post it out to you, by an 85-year-old woman who's a very strong feminist and has decided to reject this notion that you're more vulnerable once you turn 70. So it's the only one that I've seen that's brave enough to challenge that, the Prime Minister's announcement, but it's the same, well, where it's a free speech and all that.
Thank you, Your Worship. I expected to hear something like that from you a lot sooner than now, so it doesn't surprise me that you've got that article, and I look forward to receiving it. Was there any questions around His Worship's information that he'd... Okay, perfect. So with that, we will move to the rates postponement and remissions policy. So again, councillors, we've had a very constructive workshop together. In fact, that constructive, it was about 3 hours long. So it was a very informative, good discussion throughout the workshop. But I welcome that discussion back to the table today. You see the report, and there has been a bit of misunderstanding that we were going to strike the rates today, but that is not the fact. Today is about the rates postponement and remissions policy. As you all know, like we do every year, we must adopt the annual plan before we strike the rates. So it's important that we go through the process as we would every year and welcome discussion and debate around this particular policy. I take it that it's all been read, so if you're happy to speak to that, go for it. Councillor Clark.
Sure, just on the issue of the rates, it was my understanding when we had the workshop, which was early in April, that our time framing was that we would have a workshop on the 20th, and then later in the month, on the 28th, we would strike the rates. And so I'm happy to be guided on what we should and shouldn't be doing, but I find it a little bit hard to fathom that places like SDC has already announced last week what their rates are going to be. Prior to that, Queenstown Lake District have announced what they're going to do, and whether the formal mechanism might not be till they get to the approval of the annual plan might be fine. But I think members of the community are wanting a bit of a steer on us about what our rates are going to be, and so it would be my preference that we do something about the figure that we came to in the workshop.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. I just want to ask everybody to mute if they're not already muted. We can hear background speakers in the conversation, so just a reminder to please mute yourself if you haven't already. Councillor Clark, your question, is Mr. Foster here to speak to that?
Dave, you're still on mute. Do you want me to do?
All right, Claire, did you want to speak? You speak.
I'm happy to lead out Councillor Biddle. It may be that Mr. Foster would then like to add to anything I say, and I'll just start by closing the door so that the noise of the rest of the household doesn't interfere. The discussion that was had with councillors at the beginning of the month was about the possibility of putting a resolution in relation to a particular rates increase, and that then moved, Councillor Clark is correct, to having a workshop and then a formal meeting on the 28th of April. However, at no stage was there a suggestion of the rates being struck. And if Councillor Clark is referring to the fact that some councils have given a clear signal as to the sort of increase they're going to see this year, their constituents are going to see this year, then that could be brought to a council meeting for you to have that discussion formally, because we come back to that discussion that we had at the beginning of the meeting about discussions versus decisions. The annual plan itself is not yet ready for adoption, and that is when you do get the rate increase. If council would like to consider the rate increase and give a signal to its community, then I believe Mr. Foster would suggest that within 2 to 3 weeks would be possible to give that indication without having the adoption of the annual plan. Rhiannon's still with us, and I was talking to Rhiannon this morning. We are proposing the adoption early in June because we think it's good to get it out of the way if we can. But I would just counsel councillors that there is a difference between a media statement about the likely or indicative rates increase versus the formally resolved increase that councillors consider at a meeting when they consider the annual budget.
Thank you, Claire. I'm just wanting to ask councillors if they have any questions around that. I see Councillor Clark has his hand up, and I'll get to you in a second, but I just want to ensure that everyone has an opportunity to speak. So Councillor Clark and then Councillor Pottinger. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Well, I listened with great intent on what Dave put up at the last meeting we had, which was the 20th. And I thought that was reasonably impressive. And you all know that I've been an advocate for zero rates for a long time. But based on what the advice he gave me, which was in a lot of ways quite a large over picture of what we were facing in New Zealand, and some background information, I thought his suggestion of 2% was a good point to be going forward with, and I moved my position on that. And I'm not too worried about what Claire had to say about an indicative indication or a formal decision. It would seem from what we had out of the workshop the other day that all of us had a pretty uniform agreement that 2% was a good benchmark to go to. And that's not likely to change in the next 3, 4, 5 or 6 weeks. So why don't we just give them an indication? And even if it's worded in an indicative manner, to just say that this is what we're looking towards, because it's unlikely to change.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Soper. Can you just mute yourself, Councillor Soper? Or unmute, sorry.
At the moment, I just want to make the observation that council does not make decisions in workshops, and I would never like to give the impression to the public that we do, and that it may be that if Mr. Foster is indicating that 2 weeks from now we could discuss at a formal council meeting an indicative rate, then I would be comfortable that that was what we did. But I don't know that this discussion should go any further today with any indication that council make decisions in workshops.
Thank you, Councillor Soper. Anyone else? Would anyone else like to speak to that? Councillor Pottinger.
Mine's not in regards to the rates increase. It's actually to do with the item that we're discussing, policy. So back when we first discussed this policy, it had a 30% reduction in income as one of the criteria. It's in paragraph 1.2, and I suggested that we change it to 20%. That seems to be a lot of wage sort of decreases or whatever. But what I mean, I hate changing my mind like this, but I just want to throw it out there. Reading in the media about what Gore put forward was their criteria for postponement was financial hardship due to COVID-19. Now I'm just wondering, and it's purely up for discussion, is financial hardship just a more general, easier term to come to grips with than putting in a percentage value? To me, it sounded quite good the way that Gore had worded it, financial hardship caused by the pandemic. Now, I'm just asking people, do they like the 20%, or is that an easier one to get your head around?
Thank you, Councillor Clark, and I've got hands going up. So I have Councillor Arnold, Ludlow, and then Clark.
Who's first?
You.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm happy with the 20%. I prefer the 20% because to me, it's to suffer hardship. It generally is a loss of income, and I think it's rather than sort of it's easier to prove, if you like, than sort of just look at a big picture, then sort of make an assessment as to whether you have or not. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. It just shows what you turned over last year, what you turned over this year. Perhaps say 3 weeks in a row. To me, it's just easier. The government numbers they've been doing are very good. I think this is good as well. Yeah, so I support the 20%.
Thanks, Councillor Ludlow.
Yep, I'm in the same position. I think it's easier if we have a more firm indication of what we want. If we were to leave it at hardship as a result of COVID-19, in that sense, it's too subjective and might leave it open to some people taking advantage of it. Thanks, Tony.
Thank you, Councillor Ludlow. I think there was Councillor Lewis, Clark and then Lewis. My apologies.
Yeah, my position's in support of what Rangi raised. I think a percentage can also be manipulated. So, for argument's sake, husband and wife living in a house without a mortgage, and the wife gets a drop of 20%, or they combine get a drop of percent, may well be in a position that's still okay, where another person with a family with 3 or 4 kids that gets a 15% or a 25%, depending on where the margin is, could be in serious trouble. So I favour the hardship thing and just allow it to be assessed on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Crackett and then Arnold.
Kia ora, thank you. I actually disagree with Councillor Clark there in the sense that the 20% pertains to a postponement of rates, so it's not like someone and their husband and wife are just going to turn around and take advantage of the situation like that. As long as it is covering all bases and there is a quantifiable number there that we can actually use to benchmark against, I think that that's the best outcome, because otherwise, like Councillor Ludlow said, you've got too much subjectivity. It also comes down to the person who's applying for it as to what they would define hardship to be, and then that becomes a grey area. Who's the person that makes the judgment call on whether or not a person is in hardship or not, when it doesn't have a quantifiable number to it?
Thank you, Councillor Cricket. Sorry, I'm trying to mute at the same time. Excuse me, Councillor Lewis, I'm so sorry. I completely missed you. So please ask your question and then we'll go back to Councillor Arnold.
Thank you, Councillor, but it's the story of my life being missed.
I'm sorry.
I think we have to be very careful to make sure we have rates postponements in preference to rates remission, because there will be a lot of people out there that will be applying for rates remission who may well not be entitled to it. It'd be very hard to do a financial background check on everybody, but quite a lot of people, and I dare I say, people who are on a benefit are struggling in that, but they have had an increase in their benefit, and probably their expenses haven't been extended much over the COVID for all of that. There are extra charges, of course, for deliveries of groceries and things, but their income has been pretty static. So we've got to be careful people do not take advantage of the situation for the sake of it. There have been 1 or 2 things, for example, the wage subsidy for large companies seems to be being abused. And I say that word with quotation marks, I'm not pointing for it, but the people definitely taking advantage of the government's leniency, and let us not let people take advantage of our apparent leniency. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. Councillor Arnold.
Yeah, well, I looked through this policy quite closely, and I actually thought it was actually a pretty good policy. And just after hearing Councillor Clark's description of some of the circumstances that could alter perhaps the way a person was assessed, makes me think even more that you need to just stick to this percentage. The people that are going to be applying for this, they're already under stress. So the last thing they need is to really do a dissection of their in-depth financials to be assessed and judged on as to whether it suits or not. So to me, it's good to have a simple criteria. And it's not just a national thing goes where people that have abused the system. You can always get systems like that, but generally speaking, I think if you talk to most decent business people, which are most business people, they'll think that the government's been quite good in their reactions and how they kept it simple and acted fast. And I think by having a percentage here, I think that we're sort of giving that sort of same message. And it is only, as Councillor Craig said, it's a postponement, generally speaking. So you're still going to pay the rates, it's just you're going to pay them a little bit later. So I think keep it simple, keep it clean, keep it neat. So I agree with Councillor Crackett on this one.
Thank you, councillors. I just have 2 questions of Dave, if I can, and then I see Councillor Clark has another question. So I will go to Councillor Clark after I've asked my questions, but I want to apologise first because I had intention of sending them through a bit earlier and my day got away on me too. But the first one is I see that the policy isn't effective immediately, and I'm struggling with why we have to wait till May to adopt this policy. And I'm struggling that we have to go out and consult on what we know our community needs already. So that is the first question. And my second question is in regards to the interest that we're charging on the postponement. And I come back to what I first raised in our workshop was why we have to charge interest at all. And I'm struggling with those 2 things. So I just want to ask Mr. Foster to explain, please.
In answer to the first, the rates postponement policies, rates remissions policies are an element that is covered in the Local Government Act in the early 100s. I think it's about 105. And it's an element the council may have postponement policies, it may have remissions policies. But where it has a policy, it has to adopt that policy or change that policy following a consultation process that fits with Section 82 of the Local Government Act. So Section 82 of the Local Government Act is a consultation process which is a little bit more flexible and loose compared to the special consultative procedure that you need for certain elements, but it does require a period of consultation. So hence we've got a fairly simple policy. We will go out with a form of consultation probably for about 4 weeks, I think. I think the legislation stipulates about 4 weeks. So we need to consult on an amendment to the policy or the adoption of a new policy. So that's the answer to the first question. The second question is that we're actually looking for the policy to be reasonably flexible to allow people to apply. And one of the things that we're thinking about around that is to get that level of reasonableness in, there needs to be a sort of financial hurdle which doesn't just say to everybody, look, apply for it. So we've gone at 3.5% because there's no application fee for it. So for our other postponement policies, you may note in the document there's a fee for actioning it. This one has no fee for actioning the postponement, and the interest rate that's set is just slightly above our cost of funds, but also below the lowest cost of funds for a ratepayer. Right, so basically it's there to stop people. It's there to stop everybody just deciding that they'll postpone their rates for a year, right? So there's going to be some financial cost. If you've got the money, you're not going to postpone. But if you haven't, then you're going to be making that judgment. It's flexible, so it's going to cost you less than your mortgage will cost you. And so that's the reason for going with a cost in there.
So just for some clarification around that, should I want a rates postponement, it would be less for me to pay the interest to the council than to borrow the money to pay the rates?
Yes.
And that's why we need to keep that at a level where people, again, don't take advantage. Would that be fair?
The key is to stop people taking advantage. Effectively, what we're trying to eliminate is the free lunch view. Okay, so you get a whole lot of free riders who decide, oh heck, I might as well postpone my rates for a year if it's not going to cost me anything. Whereas what this is it's a little bit of a hurdle. It's not going to stop people applying if they need to, but it is going to stop people sitting back saying it's a free ride. That's the reason for it.
Okay, my concern, I guess, is around like the complexity of applying for such a rates postponement and or remission, and I would hate to think that we're making it too hard for people who are desperate at this time and probably in a position where they've never ever been before.
And that was my concern. So my concern in terms of writing it, that's why we've come up with the 3.5% interest rate, right? Because actually at 3.5% as an interest rate, we're not going to invest a lot of money to even test the 20% income loss. We will be doing a little bit, but we'll be doing very little bit. We'll basically be accepting that because our cost of funds is covered, that the only people that are going to apply for this are the people who needs to. So therefore, it's a hurdle to offset a higher level of administration for both us and the applicant.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Foster. I appreciate that. Any further questions from any councillors? Councillor Clark, and then Pottinger.
Dave, just going through the policy, I see there on page 65 of our book, it says remission means a rate that is not paid by the ratepayer and is paid by council on behalf of the ratepayer. The ratepayer's debt is written off.
Yep.
As I go forward in the policy, I don't see any criteria for a remission of rates. It all talks about postponement of rates, or have I missed something?
There are some, but they aren't in regards to hardship. Generally, where the local government, and you'll notice it's very similar to where the banks are. To be eligible for it, you have to own the property.
Yep.
So the big element with it is, if you own a property, you've got wealth. The issue you run into is cash flow. So what local authorities do in regards to it, and certainly the hurdle for a local authority, and in all my time in local government, I don't think I've processed a single application for remission of rates on financial hardship because the hurdles are typically too high. So what ends up happening is council have a number of policies where they sit back and say, look, if you're cash flow short, then we will postpone the rates. And our earlier policies effectively postponed it until you weren't the owner, or you died, or you sold the property. And so because of that, that's the way we go. So if a property is mortgaged, then the mortgagee holds security, but interestingly, rates stand in front of a mortgage. So first payment whenever a property sells is always to meet the rates. So in that mix, the common understanding of local authorities is actually to be fair to the rest of the community. You shouldn't write somebody's rates off where they have a valuable asset sitting in the background that at some stage can be realised and liquidated. And if it does, then the ratepayer should get paid their money.
Yep. So just as a follow-on to that question, so what you're suggesting that's going to be available to ratepayers, these are residential ratepayers, not commercial, is really just a deferment or a postponement with a catch-up later on.
Yep.
There is actually, in effect, no remission for, even though the policy talks about remission.
That we do have at the end of the policies, there are remissions for, what are they?
Penalties.
Yeah, I've got them. Penalties.
One for penalties. There's also one for remission of rates for sports groups, other groups, and that type of thing. But no, we don't remit rates or write rates off for hardship.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you, Councillor Clark. I believe I had some others to ask questions. Councillor Pottinger.
Thank you. Is it true the current rates that have been sent out now are due July 1? Is that right?
No, they're due May 20th, I think.
Oh, right. Okay. So obviously, it was a good point Tony raised, that obviously some people are really, like it's cash is drying up quick for a lot of people. Obviously, with May 28th, the current rates maybe anywhere from 600 to 800 to whatever. This policy will not be ready by then. Is there as far as the postponement goes, is there any way that they are allowed to say, hey, look, I can't afford it this time, but I'll take advantage of the policy when it comes in? Or how do we work this? How do we help out right now?
We gave some thought to how we would word that in terms of a release. And I think a release, Hannah, if you can just nod, a release is ready to go. So we have given thought to that. So really what we're saying to the staff, and the staff have asked that question also in regards to it. We have, as you've noticed, there's the flexibility for us to remit penalties where we think it's worthwhile to remit penalties. So basically when people ring the staff, they will be advised thank you for ringing. We will take note of your details. Don't pay the rates, and a penalty will not be charged until the rates postponement policy has been considered. We couldn't go out and say, just wait for the policy, because that would be predetermination in terms of we're saying, although we're consulting, this policy is absolutely going to go through, and we can't say that. So we're actually treading quite a fine line. We have elements for penalties where we can be more flexible, and typically what we're looking for is a payment plan in the mix of it. So when will people be able to afford it? We have those items in the toolkit. So they are the ones, Councillor Pottinger, that will be applied in the meantime. And if this policy goes ahead, / when this policy goes ahead, whichever, we will be getting back to those ratepayers, and they can immediately convert that rate that they haven't paid onto here, and no penalties will be applied in the meantime.
Right, and it's a matter of, are we doing some sort of media release that may inform people of this intention, rather than just waiting for people to phone up and say, hey, I've got no money?
I see that Hannah's waving her hand. So what I'm assuming is that, because I do know the rates policy postponement media statement has gone out, hasn't it, Hannah? Are you able to answer Councillor Pottinger's question around communications to ensure that our public don't wait and put themselves in a worse off position, is probably what you're looking for. Is that correct, Councillor Pottinger?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So last week we did issue the press release to let the media know, and also the public know, so that's up on our website, that councillors would be today considering the postponement policy and remission policy. We also have done some work on our website through our social media page as well, around making sure people understand that if they have any concerns about paying their rates, to contact our team either by phone or by email. For example, I myself have received a few Facebook messages through the Invercargill City Council page, and so I refer those people directly onto our rates officers. So that's an ongoing thing, Councillor Pottinger. It won't simply stop now that we're waiting for that consultation, nor is it something that I was waiting for that consultation to enact. We are aware that ratepayers are receiving their bills now, and that's creating a little bit of concern in that space. So it's something that I'll definitely be looking to ramp up in the comms space in the coming days and or weeks. So,
no, that's great. I really appreciate that. Thanks.
One of the things.
Thank you, Hannah. Councillor Soper, and then back to Dave.
Yeah, if I can just point out that the last day for the payment of the rate that has just been sent out is actually the 29th of May. I think someone said the 20th. It's actually the 29th of May, which means that that timing actually fits in very well with what Dave and Hannah have just been describing. If there are ratepayers who can't pay that one, it will be very straightforward to use our remission policy for that particular period, because the last day for payment without penalty is the 29th of May. So the timing is actually going to work quite well for anyone in that position.
I'm assuming you mean, Councillor Soper, the postponement policy.
The notice that has just gone out has a last day of payment of that portion of rates of the 29th of May. So what Dave and Hannah were just describing about the possibility that anybody who can't pay that would go into the penalty area, and we could then use our remission of penalty policy to help assist that person, will fit very well with that timing.
Makes sense, thank you.
So it makes sense. What we've got in the postponement policy, to me, makes perfect sense, and what Hannah and Dave Foster have just been describing makes perfect sense about the rate that would be needing to be paid as of the 29th of May as the last date. We are going to be able to cater for people who have difficulty with that payment, as well as the postponement policy we're talking about now, dealing with the next 12 months.
It's always better to check than assume. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Clark. Oh, no. Okay. Okay. Sorry, I'm just going to mute you, Dave. Dave, did you have something to say?
I was actually just going to add into the mix of it. When we had the conversation with staff and for an assurance for council, technically we don't need this policy. We actually could handle all of this stuff under our current policy. What we thought though was that's a technical analysis. So we've actually written the policy to make it very clear for people that we are doing something in regard to COVID that's easier for them to comply with. So councils don't need to worry about the fact that if this policy is delayed or slowed down for any reason, we can still effectively come up with an arrangement that is similar to this under what we currently have.
Thank you, Mr. Foster. I think that's important from what I'm hearing is the concern that we're making. We don't want to make it too difficult for people in need in our community right now, and this is something that we've never seen before. So I would say that we underestimate those that are going to need help, whether it's 20% or financial hardship. So I get a feel from the screen that everybody is happy. Kia ora and welcome to Michael. I just see you pop up here, so welcome. If there's someone that would like to move that we receive our rates postponement and remissions policy, and that we approve the appended rates postponement and remissions policy option 1 for consultation. I do need to pick up. Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Moved by Councillor Abbott, seconded by Councillor Ludlow. Thank you. I do need to pick up Councillor Clark's question around the signalled amount, but can I adopt this policy first if that's at all possible for those staff who have worked hard to get everything up and running for us today? So with that in mind, motion's been moved and seconded. All those in favour, raise your right hand. All those against? Carried. Thank you, team. So that's done. Now back to you, Councillor Clark, just in relation to signalling the rates increase. You did have a further question about that.
Yeah, just for Dave really. Claire suggested that at a meeting in the next 2 to 3 weeks, given that we're going to have weekly meetings, that we could progress this, so we give some indication to the community. And she suggested that Dave needed time to prepare for that. So I just wanted his input about how long it would take him to get his thoughts together on a thing, or whether the advice he gave us at the last meeting, which was 2%, would be an okay figure to progress with.
Dave, you're muted.
Pardon me. It would be wise to have a report, because I think the report puts it onto the agenda, it gets a decision. I can be ready to have a report going up next week. The work for the workshop is effectively all done. So that's not going to change. I can put up a paper to next week's meeting that would be able to go forward to agree what a rates rise would be.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Mr. Foster. I do think, and I totally call Councillor Clark's concern that the community is definitely waiting to hear something. So if we are in a position to do that and we still qualify and meet all the local government rules and regulations, then that's a good compromise. So thank you for offering that up. Next week, Councillor Clark, if you're happy with that, if you just want to give me the thumbs, thank you, and we can move on. So team, we're just about done. Just need to get an indication, does anyone need a break, toilet break, coffee break? I'm happy to adjourn for 5 minutes while you go to the toilet, grab yourself a cup of tea, and you can leave your videos and everything as they are. So I'm happy to do that before we go into the gambling policy, or we can go through the gambling policy, move into public excluded, and then adjourn. Choices.
I May I? I think it would be tidier if we just went through the gambling policy and then the urgent business, because that way it also give comms the chance to cut it there and then we can move into public.
Yeah, agree.
Excluded, public excluded, sorry. Yeah.
Yep, agree. Much more straightforward to do it that way.
Great. Okay, let's move on then to item 13 on the agenda, which is our gambling policy. Just bear in mind that we put this policy on hold and we're waiting on the outcome of iwi Māori contribution to that policy, and we are now in a position where we can adopt that. So I will hand it over. This is under regulatory, is that correct?
Yes.
Where are you, Councillor Arnold? Are you wanting to talk to this?
Hello.
Hello.
What do you want me to do? Talk to what?
Are you wanting to speak to your policy, Councillor?
It's not my policy. Regulatory, the gambling policy. No, not really. No.
It's finance and policy, Tony.
Sorry, what was that?
It's finance and policy.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. I'll chuck that to Mr. Clark.
Well, I've read the policy and I have some questions. They're really determined by, as we work our way through it, I've got some questions around some of the parts of the policy, so probably best to leave it till then.
Can I speak, Tony?
Yep.
Just that may well have caught Nobby on the side there, because this was a postponement of a policy that we started to hear under finance and policy under the previous council.
Oh, yes, it was. My apologies.
Yeah. And
sorry,
it came
Councillor
back.
Clark.
Yeah, it came back for us to make sure that we had gone through correct consultation with iwi, not just with Te Ao Marama, which is actually our local obligation, but other iwi and hapu representatives locally. It's not really open for council to discuss at this point the detail of the policy, because you needed to be there for it and hear all the submissions. So, you know, we can't go through and debate the mechanics. We either adopt the policy now that we're confident there's been sufficient iwi consultation, or we'll reject it and start again. Thanks, Tony.
Thank you, Councillor Ludlow. I really appreciate that reminder and explanation, because I was thinking it was poor Councillor Arnold who was looking at me sideways, and then Councillor Clark. So with that in mind, I know that the staff have worked very hard sending out all the consultation to iwi Māori organisations, so thank you very much for that. Because I have been sitting in that, I'm happy to move those recommendations and that we adopt the gambling policies review be received, and that the appended class 4 gambling venues policy and the board TAB venues policy be adopted. So I'm happy to move that. Thank you, Councillor Ludlow. I guess any discussions around it, because it was done last term and there was submissions made on that. Councillor Clark, maybe you can follow that up with staff afterwards around the policy through the CEO, if that's beneficial to you. Otherwise, we will proceed with that move to adopt the policy. So all those in favour? Oh, raise your right hand, sorry. And against?
Yeah, Tony, I want it recorded that I don't agree with the policy.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Thank you. So well, that motion's passed, and I will move to the 13.4, which was the draft policy for the TAB. Oh, no, we've adopted that. That's all been adopted. Sorry. Any questions? Great, so I'm going to move into public excluded. Anyone happy to second that?
Just before that, we had a
Councillor
item on the agenda.
Crackett, I'm so sorry.
And Madam Chair, before you consider the item, could you please have a resolution as a major late item on the basis of time?
I'm happy to move that we accept that as a major late item. Councillor Crackett, I'm so incredibly sorry. Seconded by Councillor Ludlow, thank you. All those in favour, raise your right hand. Against? Councillor Clark, are you raising or againsting? All in favour, raise your right hand. Against? Carried, thank you. Alex, my sincere apologies to you, and maybe you want to just update us on that late report, thank you.
Thank you. So I've been a member now of the Young Elected Members Committee, sorry, not the committee, the group for my last term and now again this term, and have found significant value in being able to connect with other young elected members throughout the country and support them in their journeys and learning quite a bit about the beast that is local government. They had put out nomination or calls for nominations for all of the zones throughout New Zealand, and they had all came in, and some people had been appointed and the rest are going through the nomination and election process. None were received for zone 6, so a notice was put out that we're not going to have one, and I saw that and didn't believe that was a good thing, that we don't have at the bottom here with our 10 councils any representation. So I got in contact and asked if we could potentially reopen the nominations for an extension and put my name forward for it, and that was accepted. So I would like to ask for your permission, council, and your support that to be nominated as our zone 6 representative, so that we have some representation for the Southern Councils on a national body. Please.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. I moved last time in that hui that I'd be happy to nominate you. I still feel that way. If anyone would like to speak to that, please let us know. Councillor Soper, anyone else? Thank you.
I'm happy to second it because I believe Councillor Crackett has been a very active member of that body, has reported to us on a couple of occasions about discussions there, and would make a very good representative, and it's quite an important part of local government New Zealand that there is that young members body, so I'm happy to second that.
Thank you, Councillor Soper. Sorry, Councillor Kett. I've just been distracted by cat's tail there. So that's been moved and seconded. All those in favour to support that recommendation, please raise your right hand. Against? Councillors, I just want to remind you that I need you to be voting because I can see people aren't. So please, if you support that recommendation, can you please raise your right hand? That's everybody, thank you. And no one against. Thank you very much, team.
Thank you.
Your Worship, before I move into public excluded, would you like to close our meeting to the public? Thank you.
You're muted.
Just a moment, Your Worship. I'm just going to, can you unmute yourself there? Thank you.
That better? Yes, just great to see the team, as it's been renamed, working together, and it makes it a lot less stressful, I think, for everyone involved. And it's going still, I know we've made fantastic progress as a country, and we can all feel proud, and there was the nurse from Invercargill, and neat things have really happened. This journey is far from over, and we've just got to brace ourselves and be flexible at the same time. and work through all the issues, and that's what we've done today. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. And with that, I will move into public excluded and ask someone to second that motion, please. Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Moved and second. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. And before we do sign off, thank you to all the staff who have been working incredibly hard every day, trying to come up with the different levels of how we get back to business as usual on our streets in Invercargill. So ka pai koutou katoa to you all for doing all that work. Sincerely appreciate it. And we'll move into public excluded.